Hello, happy Monday.
Hello. Yorick, I have a question for you. So why, when you switch on your camera, we see the monochrome TV things when you have the colored bars? It is because of the acquisition card that you bought, or is it something else?
I think it's the capture card kicking in because it's plugged in by default. But I think it like auto suspends, similar to like any USB device, or maybe it just takes a second or two for the GoPro input to be sent initially. I'm not sure.
It gives me real nostalgic feelings because the last time before last week or whenever I first saw it, like recently, it was like 20 years ago on TV. Did you used to have a thing when I was young? We didn't have enough TV programs. It wasn't like 24/7 TV scheduling, and you'd have like a holding page where they just put it up for like some hours in the day. Now I'd always just sit and watch it, like convinced that like sooner or later like an amazing program was going to happen. It'd probably be like 5 hours, like it's any minute it's going to be great.
Yeah, and it's very similar to the thing that we see when Yorick opens his camera. So it is at least here in Italy was in a square. So you have a square with the thing inside, and then everything outside was black. So you have this kind of signal. But yes, when I was young, there was such thing here.
Back in the day, in the olden days, when we were young. Welcome, everybody. So Robert is out getting his vaccination. So hopefully he'll be back with us later on. And is that all of us? I feel like, yeah, we're all here otherwise. So let's kick things off. MTTP, I have shared it up there. So it's looking super healthy, which is great. So well done, Yorick, well done, Robert. I'm going to leave the target as it is for this week. We said originally that when we had 2 weeks of incident-free time, we'd review this. So I think based on the interruptions we saw beginning of last week from the security vulnerability, we'll leave the target as is through this week and review. Hopefully it'll be a super quiet week and we can go back to our regular 12-hour target from next week. So on the announcements, so I just put in the engineering Q2 OKR issues. Super helpful that they're all just in one place. I think that's probably the first time I've just seen every department listed out there. They are all work in progress for the next couple of weeks. So just to be aware, but still, particularly infrastructures, they're definitely not finalized. They're definitely draft, but useful to have some visibility. PG upgrade was postponed till May 8th. So the main thing I think just to watch for on this one is firstly, like, thank you, Skabek, Henry, for the help you gave last week. We may be asked to be involved in other things leading up to this. If it looks like we are involved more than just a tiny bit, we'll review the release management schedule as we have both of you two in the next rota. So just as a heads up for everyone, like hopefully this won't be disruptive, but if it looks like a load of work for us, we'll prioritize it ahead of some of our other things. Slightly related to that, I think, Skabek taking Friends and Family Day this Friday. So thank you for Robert for covering, and Robert is hopefully not too taken out, but potentially taken out later this week with vaccine cover. Super, thanks Skabek for covering that stuff. So the discussion point I had for today was I'm thinking around OKRs. So thanks for the comments so far on the proposed Q2 OKR issue. One question I had really was, how useful is it to make deployment SLO as an OKR? So we don't have to have it as an OKR. We do need to do some work on it. But it's really, so let me go through kind of the pros and cons of something being an OKR. On the plus side, it's easy to prioritize because we do OKRs and then we do other things. So really in that case, it'll be very straightforward for us to decide, like, should we be doing this deployment SLO work, or should we be doing something on rollbacks or like coordinate deployments or something like that, or other, right? The downsides, deployment SLO may not be a full quarter of work, which kind of is a question mark, I think. I don't want to expand it unnecessarily to fill a quarter just because it is an OKR. Like if we can achieve something good in 3 or 4 weeks, perfect. That would be the best outcome. And then probably the biggest question mark around something being an OKR or not is everybody in the department is pretty slammed right now. You may have all noticed we're doing a little bit too much. So going into this quarter, we really want to try and just focus on what do we have to be doing. So in that sense, like if it doesn't add very much or it doesn't add enough, I would rather us go in with far fewer OKRs and just reduce some of that pressure. So question really for everyone here is, given that we will definitely be doing some other work on rollbacks and change logs and coordinate deployments as well, will it be useful for us to have deployment SLO defined as an OKR, or should we just prioritize the tasks week by week?
May I ask for the specific meaning of this SLO? Because I'm always getting confused by OKRs with objectives and key results, right? So would the objective be that we hit a certain SLO all the time? So that would be the goal. And the key result would be to, I don't know, set up SLIs to be able to measure this, or is it meant in a different way?
So the very first part would be to get SLO fully defined and in the handbook with a target that we can be tracking against. In order to have a target, we'll need to be able to measure to some degree, because what ideally we'd do is say, like, over the last 3 months, it has been this number, and we can set a sensible target based on that. But that would be the very first part, would just be the definition and a target.
Okay, but this sounds like the key results would then be to first have SLIs, right, that we can measure, and a way to record them.
Not necessarily. Well, yeah, maybe a way to record them. Yeah, so I think the objective would be to have a deployment SLO. The key results would be there's something in the handbook. There is a target that we can work towards, and yeah, they will be visible somewhere. Because I think the step after defining this deployment SLO will be how do we choose what to optimize on the pipeline? There'll be some things, I'm sure, which like repeatedly go above our SLO, or maybe we'll see a trend, something trending up going ahead out of our SLO. So we'll be using this to help prioritize those pieces of work.
Yeah. So I mean, if we set some target, then we would be tracking this over the full quarter for sure, if we hit it, right? Or if we getting above it. So it's something which easily spreads over the full quarter. It just depends on how good we are hitting this target and how much work we need to spend on it, right, to try to stay within this. But the objective would be meant for the full quarter, I think, right, to try to reach this objective of a certain SLO, right?
Well, I mean, it depends on how we want to set the target up. So I think from what I've seen with the way MTTP has worked is we sort of set a sort of a slightly stretched target, but something which we can hit. And then when we want to lower the target, it kind of comes with a big change. So for example, we are currently targeting 12-hour MTTP, and that's very much linked to rollbacks. We won't go beyond 12 hours until we also have rollbacks. And then we'll use deployment SLO in a similar way. So say our target is, well, I don't know what the answer, the rough number would be like 7 hours maybe. We would sit around that, but then at some point, maybe we say, okay, actually, we want to lower this target. How do we get this to 5 hours? And we'd have to look through and see, okay, we could, I don't know, change the pipeline or do something else to actually lower this.
I see. Yeah. I think it makes sense to have this kind of target, and then also needing to come up with metrics to support this.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, regarding metrics, I think that there's this Andrew's proposal, which is really nice, which is to frame our SLO as the Updex SLE. So it's kind of comparing. I'm rephrasing one of his examples because he's using commits. I think merge request is more suitable in our case. So for instance, something like number of master merge requests deployed to production within 1 day compared to total number of master to merge requests merged to master in the same amount of time. And so, and then he was proposing to, because this doesn't give us insight into the details of where things are just going south. So having this as an external bucket, as external boundaries of the things we are measuring, then we can do things like number of merge requests that we tagged within X amount of time compared with number of merge requests merged, and then things that completed QA within this amount of time. Things always being merge requests. So merge requests that completed QA within 4 hours compared to merge requests merged to master, and then again merge requests deployed to staging within X time compared, again always same thing, merge to master, and then canary. So we have the big thing, which is we reached out to production, and then we all have different SLE for everything that happens before, so we can see what is trending, which one of this is trending. It's trending outside of basically the boundaries of the control, and we can see where we need help.
But right now we are talking about deployments, right? Not of bringing a certain MR into production, right? So
yeah,
it's about the type of deployment, I thought, what we are tracking here.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good point. So the idea is about how long it takes to deploy a package. So while this things that Andrew is proposing is more about, it's based on the merge request.
Yeah, so this is more MTTP what he is mentioning there, right? In time to production from a merge request. But this SLO seems to be about
you're right.
the length of our deployment pipeline, right? So it's a different thing, I think. And what I proposed in a comment before that is at least an idea, because we have this, in Prometheus, we have this thing which is called job metrics, which is a fairly easy way to send signals, metrics to Prometheus with certain tagging to signal the start and the end of a certain job, and also if it was successful or was a failure. We use this for database backups, for instance, and so we can track via this kind of metric when something started, when it stopped, if it failed. And using these metrics, we could measure, for instance, how long does it take on average, maybe. Just an idea of how we could track this by just having a very simple call to Prometheus at the start or at the end of a pipeline, for instance. That would be an idea how we could maybe come up with metrics for this one, if we are talking about the length of a delivery pipeline, right? I need to go to the door for a few seconds, one moment.
Yeah, it's so, Robert had an interesting graph from one of his MRs last week, which he just compiled locally, which I'll find in a sec. But what was interesting about it was that it wasn't just the current number, which was interesting, but the trend line was fascinating. So I definitely want to make sure as we go through, either I don't mind if it's the kind of the start or after, but somehow related to deployment SLO, we need to be able to say, like, what's the state? Is this just like a one-off spike that we dig into, or is there a trend that's going up that we'll want to dig into?
Yeah, maybe building on top of what Henry pointed out, instead of counting, because I was so taken into the SLE idea that I didn't check exactly what we were counting. So it was exactly a good point, but maybe the events could be number of deployments. So it could be, if we say that we would like to have deployment to production that takes 2 hours, let's say 2 hours is our goal, then we can do SLE comparing deployment that took less than 2 hours compared to total deployment. So in the same amount of time, and this will brings us into the Updex type of thing. So I mean,
yeah, I think it's definitely useful. I think probably it comes back to what we maybe touched on a few weeks ago, which is the what questions do we want to be able to answer with this? But I'll share in. So Robert had generated this locally, and being able to have this visibility for each like stage of the pipeline would be fascinating. But yeah, the goal, I think the longer term goal, so this is the piece that's in our control, which is the pipeline. But then following this, once we've got an approach and we know how to sort of validate this stuff, we'll add on the building and also the QA. So this bit right now shouldn't really take into account the QA stuff, or certainly it's not a key piece that's within our control. So we should make sure our measure kind of, we can separate that. Because the goal later on is we'll set different targets for those three, and that gives us some sort of SLA that we can work with quality and say like, hey, you know, tests are taking longer than they were 2 months ago, and we've got this agreement, and same with distribution. So clearly there's a lot of, I agree, I like the sort of Updex approach. We probably have some questions around like, what do we measure? How do we measure those? How would you feel about deployment SLO not being an OKR? And then this would mean that on the board, we would quite likely have, say like ideal case, we'll have like 1 or 2 tasks that are deployment SLO, we'll have 1 or 2 tasks that are coordinate deployments, we'll maybe have 1 or 2 rollbacks, 1 or 2 change logs. I'll ignore Kubernetes for now because that definitely is going to be an OKR, but all of these others would sit at P3. Does that feel like it would be useful? Like you'll come to the board and pick up a task. Like, is that going to be too overwhelming? Do we want some additional priorities in there?
I think that works.
I am so what I'm a bit concerned about the department strategies. Not department, we do yeah, whatever. So the strategies that we have, because they state that we are going to define those SLO by the end of Q2. So if we are not going to make this an OKR, then I think we should amend our strategies. Otherwise, it's kind of, our strategy is that we will have it by the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, then it should be an OKR.
Do you think we won't have it by the end of the quarter if we don't make it an OKR?
What I'm thinking is that everything else will be more important. We have a list of things and priorities, and I mean, OKR should be what defines our goal and our targets. And I'm just thinking about what happened this quarter, right? Then registry was not, the registry migration was not expected and came out. And even if we had OKRs, that thing was more important. That was a business case was made, and so and so and so. I'm fine with this, but what I'm saying here is that if deployment SLO is not even an OKR, having this conversation next quarter will be even harder.
Okay, so you're
even if
to have an OKR.
Yeah, maybe even if we agree that it will not take a full quarter, because maybe we can do it, and then we're just say adjusting numbers or just checking our ability to actually process and understand those numbers. It still gives this more importance, because yeah, this is an OKR for the team. It's something important. It aligns with our strategy, and yeah. So this is my idea.
It's funny how how differently people are understanding how to work with OKRs, right? I mean, I never fully read the original book about it, but I mean, there were ideas like you should set stretch goals and try to reach them, but it's expected that you only working if this is working out. Like, for instance, if you can't really plan for what is unexpectedly coming in to your team, then it's really not a good way to set stretch goals, right? Because this normally will just not work and it's frustrating. So it's not easy to make it work right. But I think trying to be very conservative with what we can reach is the best case for our case, at least, because there will always be changes during one quarter. So being careful, but just saying, I didn't want to say anything to not taking this as an OKR, just what I feel about OKRs in general and how they work or not work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely difficult when we have other projects coming in. Often we have some room to prioritize them, but certainly not always. So that is the challenge. Okay, so if we do make this an OKR, I think it's fine for it not to be a stretch goal, like they usually are, but I think it's fine for it not to be. I would very much still like it to be as small as we can make it, so because we do have lots of other things going on. So for this one, we'll just state that, like we'll keep it small. And then that will place it at a higher priority than rollbacks, coordinate deployments, and changelog. Yeah, everyone happy with that? Super. Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. I will go ahead and get the OKR issues open. The Kubernetes one's quite straightforward. We're getting very close to the end of the stateless migration, but I won't try to scale it last week. We won't use the words like finish it, but we will have like continue and have all the work listed in there. It is going to be more than a quarter, but it's probably not like infinitely more than a quarter. So that's totally fine. And our second OKR will be a deployment SLO. Objective will be to have a deployment SLO in place, which meets our strategy view, so we can track against this, but not necessarily, we won't necessarily change it. We'll just set a target and start measuring against that. Fantastic. Thank you for that. Is there anything anyone else wants to discuss?